society that is obsessed with power and hierarchy is actually quite rare in the timeline of human history. It sort of cropped up with the increase in community size. The larger a community was, the more likely it was able to defend itself from an attack. The more men you have, the more likely you are to win a battle. If your community wins lots of battles, the more likely you are to gain power. Now, what about the idea of status? This podcast is about luxury fashion after all. To define that difference, I'm going to turn to Machiavelli, the Italian philosopher. Power is the ability to manipulate, to charm, to use whatever means necessary to get what you want. Status is defined as the respect held in a group of people. Sometimes you can have power, but no status at all. For example, a much hated dictator. There's a study in which a line of monkeys were given the choice between cocaine or food in the form of banana pellets. First, the monkeys are independently housed, and then they are released into an open pen where researchers determine their ranking. After a ranking is established, the monkeys are given the choice between cocaine or food, and a pattern emerges. The top two monkeys always choose food, and the subordinate third and fourth ranked monkeys always choose cocaine. This is then repeated again and again, but with the different monkeys in the top and different monkeys in the bottom. And the results always remain the same. No matter which monkey is on top, the top two will always choose food and the bottom two choose cocaine. What this study tells us is that power literally changes an animal's brain chemistry. Of course, cocaine can change your brain chemistry, but did you know that power can as well? There is a certain dopamine effect that power gives to an individual, and it's powerful enough to sort of negate the factors that cocaine can give you. That's why the top two ranked monkeys always choose food and the bottom two choose cocaine. They are sort of self-soothing in a way with cocaine. Luxury fashion plays off of both these ideas of power and status. Evidence suggests that our decisions to purchase luxury products are overwhelmingly emotional ones. The luxury fashion house can be seen as a power-seeking individual in a way. They have the ability to manipulate, beguile, and charm their way into the buyer's minds. I know they've done that to me once or twice before. Because rationally speaking, is a $3,000 handbag 3,000 times more high quality than a high street version? Absolutely not. But the brand is 3,000 times more alluring. When we wear a luxury piece, I'd imagine our brain chemistry changes like the monkeys in that experiment. It's not the quality or the functionality of the pieces, but it's the stories that the brands tell us. That is why I'm so intrigued by luxury fashion, and that is why I'm creating a whole podcast series about it. You're listening to Dressher, the podcast about luxury fashion and the forces that influence it. The brand Prada began in 1913 with two brothers, Mario and Martino. Before I go any further, I know there are going to be names in this episode that I can't pronounce. Apologies in advance. So these two brothers had a brand called Fratelli Prada. They opened their first store in Milan, Italy in 1913. The store sold leather goods. Think travel accessories, handbags, and trunks. Just 6 years after its opening, Fratelli Prada became the official supplier of the Italian royal house. thus cementing itself as a luxury brand. If you had a Prada bag, you were a part of the upper echelons of society. When it came time to look at their heir, Mario wanted one of his sons to take over. In his mind's eye, business was no place for women. A man should be the one to run his company. However, his son had absolutely no interest in the company. Big mistake. So the reins were handed over to his daughter, Luisa. In 1958, Luisa inherited her father's company. Under Luisa Prada, she kept things going business as usual, building upon her father's foundation. Luisa Prada married a man named Luigi Bianchi, and they had 3 children, Albert, Maria, and Marina. Now, you're thinking, did I misspeak? What about the famous Miuccia? Miuccia was born as Maria Bianchi in 1948. It wasn't until the mid-80s when she was adopted by an aunt and officially became Miuccia Prada, in line with her grandfather's famous last name. Miuccia Prada very reluctantly took the helm of the company at the age of 28 because to her, the old Prada represented the bourgeoisie concept of luxury. It was stuffy and preoccupied with its own self-image. In the 1980s, when she took over the company, it was all about high opulence. Think of Gordon Gekko.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
A character in the 1987 movie Wall Street, representing unrestrained greed and runaway capitalism. In the 1980s, it was all about climbing the corporate ladder, showing off your status symbols. What kind of designer suit did you wear? What kind of car did you drive? All of these material goods were used to substitute for a fulfilled life. A cultural sentiment that too was captured in fashion, especially, if you can imagine, luxury fashion. Think about the collections by designers like Versace with their gaudy gold prints. That was the 80s for you. It was all very glossy, but what about the rawness of the real world? It didn't seem to exist in high fashion at the time, but it existed in other forms of art. In the 1980s movie Ordinary People.
Tell me something. Do you love me? Do you really love me?
I feel the way I've always felt about you.
One of my favorite movies from the 80s, actually. The Cure. Probably some of the most depressing, least glamorous lyrics ever written. The Smiths.
I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side.
Also raw and depressing sounds, however, high fashion lagged behind. In the 1980s, the world was becoming aware of each other. The old vision of the European elite was diminishing. Casual dress was starting to become a common thing. Women no longer wanted their only option to be a pantyhose and uncomfortable skirts. Mrs. Prada seemed to recognize this, and her whole career began as a pushback from these cliches she saw in the fashion industry. What made Miuccia such a visionary? Someone who challenged the status quo? Well, all of it had to do with her formative years and her education. Miuccia Prada did not just get a bachelor's, not a master's, but a PhD in political science from the University of Milan, and was deeply engrossed with leftist Italian politics.
Actually, back then I was uncertain if going on in my kind of, let's say, political career. but I was so much attracted by object and by beauty that even if back then in the 70s to be a fashion designer was the worst job I could ever do because it was politically not correct. Being leftist in Italy at that moment was kind of normal because any kind of young person, if you were vaguely intelligent, it was like that.
In college, she was very much for women's reproductive rights, and working rights. And working in fashion seemed counter to everything that she stood for. Mucha was a member of the Italian Communist Party. Now, if you're an American who is listening, don't let your biases get the best of you. A short little history lesson here. Remember, in 1945, after the Axis powers fell, Italy's dictator Mussolini fell with them. The Axis powers being, of course, Japan, Germany, and Italy in World War II. Thus, a political vacuum formed in Italy. Mucha Prada was born shortly after the war in 1949, and so much of her childhood she saw Italy in a great transition. Italy was divided north and south. The north was richer, had better technology, was more educated, and was industrialized. The south was much poorer. I think when we think about Italy today, we kind of picture a semi-wealthy and absolutely beautiful country. However, just 70 years ago, a lot of the South was living in utter poverty. Many people were not college educated and worked blue-collar jobs in factories. This was the country that Mucha grew up in. After a few power struggles, Italy established a parliamentary system. One of the biggest parties to emerge within the parliamentary system was the Italian Communist Party. I think the type of communism that took hold of Italy is unlike the type that kind of took hold of Russia or China, where there is one sole dictator. Remember, Italians very much hated the rule under fascism, and we're now a democracy. I just think that it's a little ironic that Mucha was a part of the Communist Party when she was in college. I just doubt that she has these same beliefs today now that she runs a multi-billion-dollar company. A little foreshadowing for you, but more on that a little later. After getting her PhD, Mucha did what seemed like a complete left turn. She wanted to become a mime. And yes, you heard me correctly, a mime. She went to Piccolo Theatro and studied for not one, not two, but 5 whole years to become a mime. Not really sure how that fits into the story, but I just thought that it was a really weird and interesting detail about her life. I mean, who becomes a mime? Eventually, though, after all those years of studying, Mucha made her way to Prada in 1978. While you listen to these next parts, keep in mind the kind of world Mucha was stepping into. It was one of high opulence, and it was one that really valued showing off. Logos come in and out of style. They usually coincide with how well the economy is doing. When the economy is doing well, the bigger and flashier logos get. In the 1970s, the economy struggled with high inflation, gas shortages, and high unemployment. People weren't too keen to show off big luxury logos because it would seem insensitive to the struggles of everyday citizens. Now, I understand that business is business, and 10 out of 10 times, these luxury fashion houses did not give one shit about the struggles of everyday citizens. But since fashion does draw inspiration and represent the times, even subconsciously, logos began to fall out of fashion in the 70s. Toward the end of the 80s and into the 90s, the economy boomed again, and like clockwork, logos became in fashion. It was now cool again to show off how prosperous you were through your fashion choices. This was about the time that Miuccia had her very first success at Prada. Miuccia had been at Prada for a couple of years, but nothing for the history books. That is until the mid 80s. Her first bold move when she started off in the accessories department was to push back from the status quo. While other luxury fashion houses were producing luxy leather bags covered in logos, Miuccia Prada went against the grain, pun intended, and chose an unexpected fabric, nylon. Nylon is a very durable fabric with a lot of great qualities. It's durable, waterproof, bendable, compactable, and traditionally very cheap. Desirable as a designer handbag? To me, I would never spend that much money on a nylon bag, but I would be wrong because it was the single most brilliant move because it put Prada back on many people's radars. Secondly, it was cheap to produce, so they made a butt ton of money in profit. And 3, it really cemented Miuccia Prada as a real fashion designer to look out for. The nylon collection started with a series of waterproof backpacks and eventually extended the collection to include totes and handbags, all of which were emblazoned with a small triangle Prada logo. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's a cash cow. Today, it seems like there's clearly a lack of creativity going around at Prada because they took an old idea, nylon, and made it into every item imaginable. Any type of bag you can think of, messenger bags, tote bags, wallets, they've made a nylon version of it. And it also goes as far to extend into ready-wear. I mean, I looked online just the other day and there's a nylon dress by Prada. There's also a nylon skirt by Prada, which they're selling for $2,000-$3,000. To some people, me being definitely one of them, who think it's kind of ridiculous to purchase a luxury item made from nylon. But I would say that shoppers who are more knowledgeable and who aren't just following trends, they would say that the nylon bag collection by Miuccia Prada is redefining what luxury can be, that it's a symbol of modernity. Most importantly, I think the nylon bag sort of represented Miuccia's attempt to push against the bourgeoisie, to push against her grandfather's view of what Prada was, and to push Prada to what she wanted it to be in the future. Now, there is one character that I have left out of the story thus far on purpose. Until now, Miuccia's husband, Patrizio Bertelli. Patrizio owned a Tuscan leather goods factory, and he started off as an official manufacturer of Prada bags. It was this connection that allowed Miuccia and Patrizio to meet and eventually marry in 1978. Around this time, he ran the business strategy of the brand. He went from supplier to a business strategist at Prada. What a step up. He was the one who eventually convinced Miuccia to branch out from accessories into women's wear. I guess his convincing did the trick because she worked on her first collection for the fall-winter 1988 collection. The first collection was inspired by men's tailoring, boxy, and structured. She claims that the first collection were, quote, uniforms for the disenfranchised, end quote. The collection was not taken well by critics. I get it, because there wasn't really anything special about it. The only thing that it was a stark contrast to what other designers were doing. And sometimes being different is not it, just for the sake of being different. Arguably, though, a couple of years later, one of her most famous collections that Miuccia did was for the Spring-Summer 1996 collection, titled Banal Eccentricity. This collection featured not just models. Remember, this was the 90s. Supermodels were all the rage. Prada had the supermodel of all supermodels, Kate Moss, walking the runway in ugly clothes designed by Miuccia. Kate Moss was decked out in a musty, dusty yellow blazer paired with a lime green skirt, a dull green top, and chunky sandals. Oh yeah, it was also in a clashing print combination. Other models wore librarian blouses paired with librarian knee-length skirts. Ugly chic, which at the time was not really well practiced. If you go on my website, dresserpodcast.com, and take a look at the collection, you might think what I initially thought. Another stupid collection masquerading itself as art. I've revisited this collection during the writing of the podcast and during the editing of this podcast, and after all of these months, I still think it's damn ugly. However, one thing that I have taken away is that I like that Miuccia was giving women a choice of being sexy, of being beautiful. When every other designer was saying, you must wear a low-rise top, a revealing skirt, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Miuccia was giving women the license to be practical, to be ugly if they wanted to. And that choice is what is most beautiful about this collection for me. The Ugly Chic collection cemented Miuccia as an intellectual designer. Well, what is an intellectual designer? To someone who isn't really well versed in the design world of luxury fashion, or even just fashion in general, these words can sound quite counterintuitive when put together. Don't fashion designers just drape around fabric and try to make things look pretty? Project One Way would sure have you thinking that. And sure, some fashion designers are definitely this way. These would be the kind of designers who have that raw talent and move in emotion. What feels right? What color feels right here? Their gut leads them down the right path. I would say Karl Lagerfeld would be one of these types of designers, but it would be reductive to think that all fashion designers operate in this manner. I would say that Miuccia is an intellectual designer, certainly, because she thinks through her decisions as opposed to having her gut lead her down the right path. The design process for Miuccia goes a bit like this. She wants to experience all forms of human emotion when designing. Perhaps the emotions Miuccia Prada was trying to articulate in this particular collection was one of rebellion. In an industry predominantly dominated by men, but who rely predominantly on the image of women to sell the mass majority of items, Mrs. Prada wanted to create clothes for women. Clothes that showed off the strength of women. Clothes that worked with the needs of women, that worked with their lives. A huge piece of Prada is, of course, Patrizio, Miuccia's husband. His hand is mostly felt on the business side of things. However, there's one brand within Prada that undeniably has his handprints all over it. Hint, it has to do with sailing. Sailing is probably one of the bougiest activities I can think of. Growing up, I was never embroiled in the activities of the elite. Instead, I was schlepping it in the suburbs of Illinois. But after college, I was able to participate in a number of so-called bougie activities. And my observation from an outsider looking in is this. The rich seem to have an unitchable penchant for surprising activities. These are activities where you have to schlep it. For example, horseback riding. You have to schlep it with the horse shit. Skiing, you have to schlep it with all of the equipment. And sailing, which if you've never gone sailing before, you might think you're relaxing on a sailboat with a champagne glass in one hand and crystal blue water caressing through your fingertips in another. That's certainly what I thought before I went sailing.
There's a boat there called Hey Presto. Oh, there's a boat right here called Puffin. Hello, Puffin.
Try your very best not to crash. It's instead about shucking and diving and weaving and bobbing and working and don't get hit by the boom. In other words, it's pure schlepp-tastic. If I were to throw out my theory, I think the rich do activities which require schlepping because they don't ever have to schlep in their real life. It's a new and novel experience for them, which to someone who literally has it all equals fun. In steps Patrizio Bertelli. As a rich man now, unsurprisingly, he has a passion for sailing. What's new? He meets an Argentinian yacht designer, German Freires, on an evening in Milan. The pair decide to participate in the XXX America's Cup, with Patrizio financing the team and the German Freires designing the boat. Oh, and also Pirelli, the Italian tire company, as a sponsor. I repeat, a tire company sponsoring a boat race. I mean, you can't make this shit up. But first, a little background on what the heck the America's Cup is. Now, sailing competitions are usually broken up by boat type. They have keel boats or yachts or centerboard boats, multi-hulls, and tower ships. You don't need to know what any of those types of boats are. You just need to know that the American Cup is a yacht sailing competition. Now, if you're picturing a triple-decker yacht with a powerful jet drive, you would be mistaken. Yachts that are used in sailing competitions have, well, sails. So why is it called the American Cup? Well, there was this super awesome yacht back in the day called America, which was owned by a New York businessman. He won a bunch of competitions with it, and after the boat America was retired, his most prized trophy was donated to the New York Yacht Club and was stated to be a, quote, perpetual challenge cup for friendly competition between nations, end quote. Returning back to Prada, their team name is called Luna Rossa. Well, actually, it's Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli. Don't forget that tire company. Gotta get that advertisement in because Prada paid 65 million euros to the Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli sailing team for the 2021 competition. Just 1 year. 65 million euros. In Auckland. I guess that's technically peanuts for a multi-billion-dollar company like Prada, but still. Not only does Prada get to have their name slapped on to the team, they also get the official naming rights for the cup itself. It was known as the Louis Vuitton Cup, but now it's the Prada Cup for the 2021 sailing competition, which is confusing because obviously the cup isn't owned by a single team. It's to represent, remember, quote, a perpetual challenge for friendly competition between nations, end quote. But Prada is also a team that is racing for the cup that is named Prada. I don't like it, but advertising and capitalism gets in the way with everything. And of course, they get to have their name plastered all over the sport for the rich, which is exactly their target demographic. So I guess all of Mucha's attempts to be subversive back in the 80s and 90s was just a fun little exercise that didn't really mean anything. Sure, feels that way, especially knowing that your company sponsors a yacht club and has a clothing line for sailing. You're not fooling me, Mucha. So aside from that little detour into the sailing world, I want to talk about their spring-summer 2011 collection. Prada is a brand that is known for its simplicity of design. From their nylon bags, a utilitarian design with a simple Prada logo, to their women's wear collections with their straight and masculine lines and maybe a cinched-in waist for a bit of feminine flair. This collection is nothing but simple. Mucha said before the show, "I'm tired of minimalism." I asked myself, how can I do minimal Baroque? That's exactly taken from her. Let that be a taste of what is to come. Last time I looked at Baroque art or architecture, it's not minimalist. I'm telling you, this collection, shit gets crazy. Let's talk about the colors first. If you study fashion or are a casual observer of it, you'll notice that everything kind of works in a cycle. Every 20 to 30 years or so, styles and colors get recycled. High-waisted jeans and crop tops were in the 90s. 25 years later, in 2015, they're back in again. The same story can go with bold colors. Picture the singer, 90s heartthrob Aaliyah and Tommy Hilfiger, with Tommy Hilfiger's signature red, white, and blue. In the early 2010s, bold colors were also in. Get the idea? That's kind of on a macro level. On a micro level, things change incrementally season after season. If cerulean blue is in one season, that color will evolve only slightly for the next season. So maybe it's more pastel, maybe it's more neon blue, but it's still in its essence a really deep blue. You don't get neon colors from the 80s all of a sudden. It's a gradual shift towards the extreme. It's unlike those references in pop culture.
Ugh, as if.
Where one thing is in one season and out the next. It's just not completely out. So back to Prada's 2011 Banana collection. The colors were orange, green, royal blue. There are big, bold stripes, banana prints everywhere. There's even an outfit that mixes a print of a Baroque monkey, banana, and bold stripes all into one outfit. Oh my lord. Shoulders are wide but not boxy. Instead, they're curved, well, like a banana. The shoes are wedge sandals, Oxford wedges as well. And unlike her very first collection, many critics absolutely adored this collection. But who cares about critics? What do I think? And what do you think? Lucky for me, I have the wisdom of hindsight. I absolutely despise 2010 era fashion. Bright colors match with bright colors, skinny jeans, long shirts match with low-rise whatever. That's on a commercial level. My disdain also trickles up to the luxury runway level. The commercial or high street tends to follow and sometimes outwardly copies whatever gets put on the runway. The runway is often a tastemaker, which is why luxury fashion is so important. It could be the difference between wearing banana prints or not, if you know what I'm saying. So whatever happens in high fashion, you'll definitely see it on the stores of Walmart or Target a couple of months later. Sometimes you'll see a great version, but most times it's some bastardized version of what is deemed trendy by the gods of luxury fashion. But what if the original version was already bastardized? The Prada Banana collection. then the high street will come out positively demented. I'm personally not a fan of the banana collection because there's no beauty in it at all. But when it comes to Prada, I guess I have to remember that it's not always about beauty. But my life is all about truth and beauty. I said that in my first episode. So I stand by my opinion. In 2001, a new shopping concept was opened in Broadway, New York City. Different from any other Prada store, they named it the Prada Epicenter. The word epicenter means the central point of something, but honestly, it's far too grand of a word to describe a place to shop. Places to shop, actually. There's a whole other Prada epicenter in Japan, and another Prada epicenter in Los Angeles, and another Prada epicenter in Shanghai. So kind of defeats the purpose of the word epicenter, in my opinion. But let's talk about the very first epicenter and see what makes the New York location different from a regular Prada store and if it is worthy of the epicenter name. Designed by Rem Koolhaas, a Dutch architect who founded the company OMA. OMA is a bit easier for me to say, so I'm going to just say OMA. OMA designed the space for Prada. If you're walking down Broadway in New York, you would see an unassuming red brick building with a contrasting stone. Looking more eye level, you'd see a neat cast iron storefront with symmetrical Corinthian columns. But once you go inside, that's where things become much more modern. Now, take a regular Prada boutique by contrast. Currently, there are 373 boutiques across the globe. Those include wholesale locations, those inside of a Nordstrom or a Neiman Marcus. By contrast, there are just 3 epicenters currently open. In my eyes, a epicenter solely exists for business reasons, to increase the exclusivity feeling of Prada, and to, of course, sell. Mucha wanted to create epicenters because she suspected that shoppers were getting bored of the shopping experience in traditional boutiques, which rich people are so corny sometimes. Oh, is it boring walking into the most beautiful buildings in the world, shopping for beautiful things? I guess if you do it too many times, you need more stimulation to get that same high. On a more romanticized level, epicenters are places to disseminate ideas. In the New York City location, the space is vast, and I'm not talking from a New York City point of view where people think a large closet is a decent sized bedroom. It's actually large. The floor space is 23,000 square feet. The merchandise seems almost secondary to the experience. There isn't a lot of clutter, just a lot of open space. Which space, especially in a city like New York City, equals ultimate luxury. From a technical standpoint, the dressing rooms can go from clear to opaque with the touch of a button. Clothes have trackers letting shoppers know if certain items were in stock or if they were in fitting rooms. This is all from secondhand accounts, YouTube videos I watched, articles I read. So I went to the LA location to see if all of these things were true. I took a trip to Rodeo Drive at the end of May. And Rodeo is nothing like any shopping street I've ever been to. I'm from Chicago and we have Michigan Avenue, which has all the same fancy stores. Your Rolexes, your Gucci's, your Cartiers, but it felt nothing like walking down Rodeo. First, it felt like everyone took out all of the designer that they owned and wore it all at once. And G-Wagon after G-Wagon after G-Wagon, I legit saw maybe 7 of them just walking down the street. I won't lie, it was a little intimidating, not because I thought I was somehow worse than people who are wearing designer clothes or driving fancy cars, but because I was the only one who wasn't doing that. As I got up to the Prada store, the building itself was very unassuming, much like the New York location. And I had to wait in line because the store has a limited number of sales associates and they require one to follow around each group of guests. Luxury has always been about delayed satisfaction. Like, you have to work for the privilege to be able to shop there. But we all know it's a little bit of a farce. When I eventually got the chance to go in, my sales associate was very kind. He totally clocked the fact that I was not there to buy anything, and we just had a conversation about the building itself. And to be honest, the shopping experience was nothing like what people describe the NYC location to be. It was still designed by the same people, but there's not the same technology. In fact, there was practically zero technology there at all. I don't get it. It was just a regular building with your own personal shopping assistant, and that's pretty much it. I wasn't expecting champagne or a fucking foot shine, but this is the Prada epicenter. I thought it would be, wow, where are the art pieces to gawk at? Where are the immersive digital screens? Just give me something. To be honest with you, I thought Rodeo Drive was more of an experience than really any of the stores on it, Prada and the rest of them. For me, the Prada epicenters represent a company that doesn't have their priorities straight. The Prada epicenter in New York City cost the company $40 million back in 2001. I know that was just 21 years ago, but I feel like the price of things have gone up so much since then. So in today's dollars, that's about $66 million on a single building. However, that same company also chooses to make pants that rip at the crotch after 1 year of wear. I'm not an accountant, but even I can work out. Sis, something don't add up here. And the scariest part is that this is a conscious decision. I mean, they didn't just build one epicenter. They went ahead and built 3 others. Prada is inadvertently telling their customers that they care more about how their brand appears on the surface than the actual quality of their goods. Prada is one of the biggest luxury fashion brands in the world, with an ardent customer base who have been following their every move since the early 80s. God knows I've left out some really big pieces of information in the roughly 100 years of history I was trying to cover here. However, I've included the most important bits for the story that I wanted to tell. We all know there is a saying, there are many sides to a story. And throughout the writing of this podcast, I'm realizing how true that statement really is. One of my biggest fears in doing a podcast like this is not doing a person justice. That keeps me awake at night. The thing about covering a person like Miuccia is that her story is very important for the world of luxury fashion, but her story is not over yet. It's not even close. Thank you for listening to the first official episode of the Dressher podcast. I promise you guys I will get so much better at doing this. I write and research every episode on my own, and it's been a learning curve. A very fun one, though. Find all of the books, movies, and articles I used to research this episode on my website, dresserpodcast.com. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram at Dressher Podcast. I'm on IG at Michelle Z. Chang. Please DM me with any questions you may have. If I get enough interesting ones, I will definitely do a Q&A episode to wrap up season 1. Next time, we will take a look at part 2 of Prada. There are lawsuits to discuss, Prada's sister brand Miu Miu, and even a little art history lesson. Fasten your seatbelts. Here are my fashion trimmings. I feel as though I've been very generous to Prada. I want to give credit where credit is due. And like I said in my very first episode, I also want to recognize the beauty behind these brands. Miuccia and Patrizio have a lot of things to be proud of, but as we will see next week, I feel as though they went on autopilot. They are getting older. Miuccia is 73 and her husband is 76, and they're both still working, which is insanity. I know I don't dream of labor, but go right ahead. I think we will see a transition of power very soon. Who could be her successor? Well, she has a son, Lorenzo Bertelli, but he doesn't seem like a likely successor for her. If we take a look at how Prada was handed down in the past, it seems to go down matriarchal lines. Another factor to consider is back then when Miuccia and when her mother inherited the company, it was not publicly traded. Today, it's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and you need somebody really, really competent to take over Miuccia's place. Ralph Simmons seems like a more likely successor. He worked as creative director at Jill Sanders in 2005. By the way, her label is controlled by the Prada Group. He then did a short stint at Christian Dior, and in 2020 he became co-creative director alongside Miuccia of Prada. I understand the urge to protect the family and to keep wealth within the family. I really do. However, when big companies get handed down to kin, I do believe, not always, but most of the time, it's to the detriment of the company and their customers. Especially so when that son or daughter or niece or nephew is incompetent. This practice is incredibly true for the largest companies in Korea. Hyundai, Korean Air, Samsung, just to name a few behemoths. They're all still owned and operated by their respective families who founded them. And this was sort of around the time after the Korean War. That's kind of when Korea started to embrace capitalism, and these companies built up their fortunes. And so these CEOs are usually, I would say, probably in their third generation now. And just trust me on this, most of the times these CEOs and their families are really terrible people. And I'm not just saying that to hate on them. They really are terrible people. Just look up Korean Air nutcase and happy reading. It's salacious. Just to give you a little tantalizing bit of what happened, the heiress of Korean Air, Heather Cho, boarded a flight and she was served nuts in a bag. And she lost her shit. She lost her shit because the nuts were not served in a glass bowl. And because of this terrible mistake and her ego, she made the man literally bow down on his knees and beg for her forgiveness. And then she started beating the man and then threw him off the flight and then fired him. And mind you, all of this yelling and catastrophe was done in front of many people who caught it on camera, which was how she was exposed. Obviously, that's a very extreme example of what can happen and go awry when you hand off your company to very incompetent and self-centered and egotistical children. But on an everyday level, usually family-run businesses are not very innovative because when their kids eventually take over the business, they run the business just like how their successful mother or father ran it, or just like how their successful, God forbid, grandmother or grandfather ran business. And obviously, those were different times. But the kids, growing up privileged, growing up having everything, are usually resistant to change and don't have any other better ideas. However, when a corporation is given to the most qualified person in the room, at least then there is a little bit more room for change. And hopefully, that's what's happening to Prada. And maybe they're entering a new age for the better. I sure hope so.